I think if we go live
We
right
haven't
now,
had enough
it'll be
bourbon to go
horrible.
live yet.
It'll be dangerous. There'll be disasters.
You never go live on an empty stomach. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes here with Scott Moon and the one and only Chuck Manley, who has come back from a long hiatus of the show.
Hi, guys.
It's season 4, episode 5, and today Nicholas Sansbury Smith returns to the show. The author of the Extinction Cycle and Helldivers and several other series. Orbs is a hit USA Today bestseller list. I think it wasn't one of those New York Times bestseller, wasn't it? Orbs?
Helldivers.
Helldivers.
Yeah. Yep.
We're going through kind of a transition on the show where we used to do 1 episode a week. Now we're doing 3, 4. And so we're pumping out a whole bunch of video and content for the viewers and listeners. If this is the first time you've ever watched us live, welcome. If it's not the first time you've listened or watched us and you're just now joining in, where have you been my whole life? Because you should have been here this whole time. They're eating tacos in the live chat. So welcome everybody in the live chat. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us on this Monday night.
Digital tacos.
Digital tacos.
No, everyone likes a digital taco.
Yeah, they're less fattening, I hear. The calories are not
pretty much as many as you want.
Then what's
Yeah, I know, right? So everybody, thanks for coming and spending time with us on a Monday. And Nick, I know you've been on the show before, and we hung out a lot in Vegas, and we have some good times. And but for those of our audience that might not know who you are and what you do, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got started in writing?
Well, I'm Nicholas Sansbury Smith, and yes, that is my real name. I've had a few people, actually, that's been coming up more lately than it ever has. I'm a hybrid author. I do both self-publishing, which is where I got my start, and then I have traditional publishers. Worked with Simon Schuster in the past. That series I now have back. And then my Extinction Cycle is with Orbit, and my Helldivers series is with Blackstone Publishing. And I have several other series coming out with Blackstone as well. And then I have my Orb series, which I had initially self-published, went to Simon Schuster, now it's back. I self-published it again. And my Tracker series has been self-published all along. So those are my 4 different series. And I would say I started off just basically selling Kindle books and not too many of them. And then I've been in the trenches for the past 5 years, but now I moved into audio, and that's probably where my books have been doing the best lately. Kind of even so more so than Kindle. So that's a little bit of a history. Before I started writing, I worked for Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management and Disaster Mitigation, working with FEMA and other organizations in disaster cleanup, preparedness, and mitigation, doing disaster planning, and I was a project manager as well. So that was kind of my life before writing. That's where I've gotten some of my experience in writing, and yeah, that's about it.
What you said you started off with self-publishing. What series was that? The first one that you started?
That was back in 2014, I believe. Started writing that in 2013. I'd probably have to look on Goodreads to figure out when that came out. But yeah, it's been like 5 years.
And you said that was Orbs. Sorry, you cut out just a little bit.
With Orbs.
You mentioned that you started self-publishing, and then you went to Simon and Schuster, and then now you're back at self-publishing the Orbs series. Talk a little bit about that transition and tell us a little bit about why going back and forth was good for you, and maybe why it wasn't good.
When Orbs came out, I just launched it at 99 cents, and it really kind of went viral. And that was it just was kind of a runaway hit. And I started getting, different types of inquiries from audiobook publishers, and then eventually Simon Schuster. We were talking with 47 North. I ended up landing an agent, and that's what really started my getting my feet wet in traditional publishing. Eventually, we decided to go with Simon Schuster, and they got the books into paperback. They got them into stores. But over the course of the life that series, which was a trilogy at the time. The Kindle books, they did okay, but nothing near what I had done in KDP. And then the paperbacks, they did okay too, but I ended up not even earning out my advance, which wasn't too big. And I bought the rights back. I think it was like $5,000 or $6,000 by the end of the 4 years. And I bought the rights back and self-published them again, and made that money back within the first couple of weeks. And I think about $40,000-$50,000 on that series now, just from publishing it in a self-publishing a year. So that kind of just shows you what I didn't know at the time was that how much more you can make in self-publishing if you do it right. A traditional publishing deal is awesome, and I was pretty excited about it, and it was great having my books in bookstores. But seeing the royalty rate, and also there's a thing called returns I did not know about, where literally Barnes and Noble can send back whatever they don't sell, and that comes out of the royalties. So I get some statements that were like, "Oh, that looks awesome," and then other statements that I saw negative on, and it was so that overall it was a good experience. I learned a lot, but I promised myself I was never going to do another traditional deal unless I got in advance that I felt was worth it, and worth it in the terms of it's going to pay me more than what I make self-publishing, or it's going to take the gamble out of self-publishing. So that's where I've really, and that's one thing I talk about when I do like marketing speeches and talking about my career is whenever people ask me, do you need an agent? Do you need a publisher? I say, my response is, can they do something that you can't do for yourself? And do they take the gambling out of publishing? Because truly, no matter who you are, self-publishing is still a gamble in terms of how much you can possibly make. You might make 7 figures on one series and make 50 grand on the next series. You might make nothing. So, I mean, those are big numbers, but I'm talking about some of the big names that we see all the time in the rankings. Sometimes, like even me, like my tracker series did not do even close to what I hoped it would do compared to the extinction cycle. So when I talk about traditional deals, I always say you really need to have something on the table that's going to take that worry out of your mind that you're not going to possibly do that well. And we can talk more about traditional publishing too, because like just yesterday, I had an author reach out to me and say, what do you get out of a traditional publishing deal? Are they going to market your books? And sometimes I personally have had to do pretty much just as much with my traditional publishers as I have self-publishing. I'm a little bit different though. I'm a little bit more of a hustler, which you guys probably have seen. Other authors might not be.
Really?
So, yeah. So, yeah. Where was I going with that? Basically, even if you have a traditional publishing deal, it does not mean that you're going to have your books marketed for you. You still have to put the time in. But we can talk more about that later. I just kind of wanted to give you guys.
Yeah, no, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to be very interested in that. So I'm looking at Orbs, in the first book in that series. It has over 1,000 reviews, a blend of horror, science fiction, pulse-pounding thrills. So I mean, obviously has a pretty deep readership. And how long did it take for you when you got it back into your control for you to kind of get it going again? Was there a transition phase, or?
I had a very experimental relaunch phase for this that I was really blown away by how well it did, because I had no expectations for it doing that well. Orbs is my least popular series. The ratings are way lower than my other series. So I pretty much bought the rights back and said, okay, I'm going to put it back out there. I'm going to launch really low. I put books 1, 2, and 3 at 99 cents. And I launched book 4, which I co-wrote with Anthony Melchiori. I launched that one at $2.99. So I put them all out at the same time. I had the audio redone, narrated by Bronson Pinchot. Blackstone acquired the audio rights. So we put those out with the Kindle and paperback versions, and I just launched them all together. And I used a lot of the 99-cent discount sites, Sci-Fi Bridge, Discover Sci-Fi, which I'm a member of. And it just took off. And I think those books were in like the top, all of them were in the top 1,000 for a couple months straight. So I was just blown away by how that worked, but I think a lot of it had to do with the algorithms got ticked off. Probably because of the fact I had my marketing so spread out and I did so many different things. You'll see now that their ranks are, gone back down to like probably 20,000, 30,000 range. Book 1 is in prime reading right now. So they've really tapered off. This has been over a year and a half. No, I'm sorry, a year and 2 months, I think, since I did the relaunch or something like that. But for the first couple months, it was pretty amazing. And, I do some marketing consultation on the side, and that's and this is one thing that people have approached me on, is how to relaunch a series. And there's different ways to do it. For me, I literally had basically Amazon treated it like it was a new book, because Simon Schuster took their version down and I put I put a new version back up. And that's why I think it did much better than I had expected, because I was anticipating that, I wasn't going to get a lot of the type of promotions that I would have gotten if it was a brand new release. So I also got some negative feedback on that though too, because some readers that had bought it before didn't understand, like, oh, well, do I have to download another copy? Can I get it for free? And in this case, you can't do that because of the way the old publisher version is no longer available. And when I put up the new one, you'd have to purchase that again. So, overall, my launch plan was just basically to sell low and sell as much as possible and try to get those algos working. And it did happen.
Excellent. Chris Portio says to say hi, and then she'll know what he means. So, I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I'm working with Chris right now on.
Tell Nick I said hi.
Cool.
So I'm curious. I've made a crap ton of notes, and I don't even really know where to break off because there's a lot of unpack.
Start in the middle.
Yeah. So, Orbs was self-pub and then traditional and then back self-pub, and then you have the extension cycle, and now you have Helldivers. And for me, I've read your Helldiver series. I haven't read the other ones. So that's how I know you.
Helldiver's awesome.
I think most people know you by your extinction cycle. And that's where you have a lot of different things going on with like your anthologies with other authors that are in that deal, and then your spinoffs as well. So there's some questions in the live chat that we'll get to, but I'd like to break down your extinction cycle project just a little bit and kind of explain what you have going on with that.
Or do you want me to give you a little bit of a background of the history of the extinction
Absolutely.
cycle?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So when I was publishing with Simon Schuster, and the Orbs books, Orb Book 2 and Orbs Book 3, I think it was, were coming out, I was writing the extinction cycle simultaneously. And that's what I've always done in my career. I've always had two projects going. One's typically been self-published and one's typically been traditionally published, because those traditional projects are always like the slow burn, got to get them pretty perfect. Perfect meaning I go over my draft 6 or 7 times, whereas in the self-published book, I might do it like 3 or 4 times. Especially if you're going to have an agent pitch it, because when it goes out wide and you have the major publishers looking at it, it really has to have a special premise, or the prose has to be amazing. It's got to be something special to catch their attention,
right?
Especially if you don't have a sales history. If you have a sales history, it's a little bit easier. A publisher might be willing to take a risk on you, but if you don't, like for example, when I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, maybe just like a timeline will be the most simplest way to do it. So Orbs 2 and 3 came out through Simon & Schuster. I had Extinction Horizon, which was the first book in the Extinction cycle, ready to go before they were able to publish Orbs 3. And by contract, I think Simon & Schuster had look at my next big thing, which was the Extinction cycle. And I had decided at that point, there's no way in hell I'm going to work with a traditional publisher again. At this point, nothing against them. I just wanted to be in control of my destiny again. I wanted to return to my roots in self-publishing. So I put out Extinction Horizon. If you guys want me to go into details about my launch plan for that series, I can do that also. but it's a little bit more complicated and it will take a little bit more time. But basically, I launched Extinction Horizon, Extinction Edge, and Extinction Age, the first 3 books, within like 6 months of one another. And I had them all, and then I kept putting the sequels up for pre-order and having, the link in the back. And those books were super fast-paced, so people were blowing through them in KU. At that time, it wasn't KU, it was something else. And I just kept promoting the shit out of them, doing Kindle countdowns. Every time I'd release a new one, I put the first couple books on discount, and I just kept pulling in new readers and new readers. By the time I got to book 6, I got a call from my agent, and he knew that I did not want to sell the Extinction Cycle, but we got this incredible offer from Orbit to take the series over. And after a couple months of debating what to do, I decided to sell the series to them and get the books out into mass market, and to do a book 7, which was the end of that storyline with them. At this time, the series was so popular that Kindle Worlds invited me to be part of that program. So then we had, I think, 14 or 15 other authors writing stories in the Extinction Cycle universe. And those are actually the ones that, some of those stories are the ones that I'm now republishing through my small press. So, I think a lot about how I did this, and I wonder if I had kept self-publishing, if I would have made more money, if the series would have kept selling like what it was. I don't know the answer to that. I know that the advance offer that I took from Orbit kind of took the gamble out of it, and I was happy with it. But I do know for a fact that if Kindle Worlds wouldn't have gone away, and I would have just done these spinoffs, kind of like the Michael Anderle model, where he's got so many people writing his world, I think that it would have been more successful if I would have kept them self-published. No doubt in my mind about that. So now I'm kind of going back in and, 2 years later, doing some side stories, and I have no idea how well they'll do. But that's just how it worked out. And I'm pretty happy with, the way that Orbit marketed the books. They did a really fantastic job with everything. So I don't know if I'll ever earn out that advance, but it was not something that I necessarily regretted like I did with Simon & Schuster. Now, trying to think, I started writing Helldivers 1 as a project that my agent could pitch to a traditional publisher while I was finishing the Extinction Cycle. And that one I worked on for like a year. I hired a traditional editor to help me with it too, to get it in the best shape I could possibly get it in. And then my agent pitched that wide, and we ended up going with Blackstone. So that happened when the Extinction Cycle was finishing up with, I think, book 6. And then I just have been publishing those since. So that's a little bit of a history. And then last year, I've been writing a new series. It's Apocalyptic too, and that's now with Blackstone in that 7-book deal. So sorry, it's just a lot to explain. I know what a lot of authors probably want to know is how I got to the Extinction Cycle where I did, how I got Orbs where I did. And I can go into details about launching if you guys want to. Whatever you want to talk about is cool.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think launching a book is probably, with the exception of actually how to write a book, launching a book is probably the number one answer that most people want to touch on. And it's interesting to me just when you talk about taking the gamble out of things, when you talk about whether you're doing indie or traditional, and I've been making it a kind of a point in my my life as a writer to look at having not one income stream, to kind of diversify where that money is coming from. And you mentioned right at the beginning that being in the trenches for 5 years and then hitting that audio market, and now that audio market is kind of exploding. And I've said this several times that I think audio is a completely different market than print or ebook. And to do it well, you really need to understand what a good audiobook is, and how it's presented to the listeners.
Right.
So just bringing it back to your extinction cycle, because it seems like to me your extinction cycle is going to be kind of a major project for you, just in the terms of bringing other authors in and doing anthologies and spin-offs and things like that. Is that something that when you started the series, or when it started picking off or taking off, did you see other people like Michael Anderle, or Nick Indy Webb did it, Hugh Howey did it, and then you talked about Kindle Worlds. Well, now Kindle Worlds has gone away, so you can kind of do it on your own, like you're talking about. But when it started taking off, did you immediately think I could do spinoffs like this, or is this just kind of something where you're like, I've got other stories that I want to tell and I need help to do it?
Well, so honestly, I didn't want to do the Michael Anderle type model. I didn't want to have other authors necessarily writing in my universe, because I felt that I could do, not necessarily that I could do a better job, but I just was so focused on my books and putting them out, and I had the process down, that's kind of what I was used to. I didn't want to do, and I didn't do any anthologies, and I didn't have any co-writers or anything like that for the majority of my career. And then Kindle Worlds approached me, and I was really hesitant then too, because I just didn't want anyone to come into the extinction cycle and like write their own stories where it might mess with the plot that I had or the characters. Then I realized like, this is pretty damn cool, and I decided to go for it. And the reason that I'm doing the spinoffs now though is because Kindle Worlds went away. So I didn't want all those authors to lose their books. I basically contacted most of them and said, hey, you can either republish, you have to scrub the stuff out of it that's extinction cycle related, or I'm going to do 2 anthologies for the short stories, and I'm going to publish 3 of the novels, which 3 of them are 3 series of novels. So I pretty much spent the past 6 months, doing all the type of contract work and getting new covers, new formatting, and all that stuff, and creating a launch strategy. But all of these books are coming out within the next 5 months, and after that, I don't have any plans of doing any more. I'm just trying to get the Kindle World stories back out in the world for these authors, and because I would hate to see them go away forever. So I guess the question is, how do I move forward with helping me with expanding some of my other universes? Because I think that's where like the Michael Anderle model is really cool, that I didn't consider, or like, I'm trying to think of some other guys that are doing a really good job at this, but they're able to continue their storyline and have another author come in. I mean, you guys are actually an example, right? Because who does the stories? Yeah, Richard Fox, right? One of you writes in his series.
We both have series in Richard Fox, and we both are doing stuff with Jeff Chaney as well. Yeah.
So I think that model works well. As long as like the authors work well together. I mean, that's another thing about co-writing that I found. It can be difficult if you don't have the same sort of like style. And it's hard to create a style too. So like, for example, I couldn't write first person, I don't think, with another author. I'd have to have it be in third person, like I write normally. Right. But I definitely see advantages to expanding worlds. I considered doing that with my tracker series. I did do that with Orbs, because I didn't have time to finish the series the way I wanted to, and I didn't have that opportunity with Simon & Schuster. So Tony Melchiori and I co-wrote Orbs 4 together, and now we're co-writing the next phase of the extinction cycle, which I'm starting over with book 1, in a spinoff called Extinction Cycle Dark Age. So I kind of have changed my opinion about all of this, and partly it's because of Kindle Worlds and seeing how it really is a cool, fun way to create content and to work with other people. And it's a new revenue stream too. So yeah, I guess, I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, no, It does, and I think the interesting thing about that is, like you mentioned, the co-writing and the collabs. So like what you're doing with a couple people, what Scott and I are doing with Richard, and what we're doing with Jeff Chaney is one kind of collab. What I think is interesting, and what I think is cool about what Nick Cole and Jason Onspach are doing with Galaxy's Edge is, like you mentioned, having the voice the same, or having the kind of narrative the same as you would going forward. And that's one thing that Richard Fox was really big on, is having his voice really kind of carry through the books, and he was really kind of big on that. And
His
Jeff
pacing
Chaney,
style, too.
yeah, and his pacing style. And Jeff Chaney's the same way. Jeff Chaney is very specific on how he wants the books presented and formatted. The interesting thing about what they're doing with Galaxy's Edge as a franchise is that they're doing kind of a Kindle Worlds, but it's not where people are writing anthologies. It's like the Order of the Centurion. I've got a book, Scott's got a book, J.R. Hanley's got a book, Jonathan Yanez has got a book, but they're all our styles. So like we will write in their universe with their Legionnaire characters, but we don't have to worry about making our voice sound like Nick or sound like Jason. So I think that's kind of an interesting take on that whole aspect of collaborative writing, is that they'll go through and make sure it fits in their world, but the voice is completely the author's.
They have a multi-stage canon process to make sure it fits. And
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the way Netflix does their television series. Because if you ever watch like any of the Marvel shows or any of the things they do, every episode has a different director. You know, so they've got this one long storyline.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Scriptized, but they have different directors doing different episodes so that they can get the whole thing out there and with it on whatever schedule they give themselves. But if you watch them closely enough, a lot of times you can see different styles of camera shots, different lighting and that kind of thing, so that every director has his or her own little tweak on it, depending on what the episode is, but it's still a consistent narrative beginning to end if they do it right. So it's I kind of see it like that. It allows for a lot of production in a limited amount of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is that, so you mentioned that after all these stories come out, that's, I mean, it sounds like you're not going to, that's pretty much it for the expansion of the series, except for the Nalchori books. Are you looking at doing that for any of your other series?
I consider doing that for Trackers and doing another Orbs book, but at this time, I'm just trying to get through the extinction cycle and get all these books back out. One thing that does concern me is saturating the market with one storyline, and I've seen that happen a lot. You might have, a couple hundred to a couple thousand rabid fans that are going to read everything, but it's going to be more and more difficult to market those books and keep them going. The more books you have stacked, that means the more AMS ads you're going to have to monitor, the more stuff you're going to have to promote. And, I was just talking to one of my publishers a couple of weeks ago about my bandwidth and how I only have so much to market. So that's one concern for me, moving forward with the spinoffs and stuff like that, is making it worthwhile for both me and the author. I don't want to commit to something and, get it out there and have it not do too well because I don't have the time to market it. So, or I don't have, and not necessarily that I don't have the time, but like I said, I don't have the bandwidth. I only have, I can only send so many newsletters a month before people are going to start ignoring them, or so many posts that say like, hey, new release. And before people start realizing like, well, this isn't really my next big thing. And some people only will, even my biggest fans, sometimes they will only read one series for me, for example. So I'm pretty mindful of that. At this point too, I'm trying to be kind of careful with my audio releases because I know that Audible is only going to promote so much of mine at this point. If I keep launching stuff, that it's going to take away from some of my other bigger projects. So those are kind of things in the back of my mind. And also, when I was talking about like voice and working with another author, and keeping that voice the same, that's true for like the spinoff I'm doing with Tony. Like Tony and I are perfect together. I don't, when I did the Kindle world stuff, I created a Bible and I helped the authors with their questions, but I didn't I didn't get involved at all with like what tense they write in, or what if they're writing like more of a darker narrative, or if they're writing Mark Tufo wrote one that was kind of a comedy. So I think in those situations, like what you guys are doing, what you described for Galaxy's Edge, that's pretty cool, because that gives you your own ability to expand the story in your own voice. But for me, when I'm actually tackling a project with another author, that's when I think it's more important to try, not necessarily have the same sort of voice, but just have the same style, because readers can totally tell the difference when one author writes one way and another author writes another way. So some co-author stuff I see where you look at the reviews, you can tell readers saw the difference. You know what I mean? So that's important too, I think, to make sure that it's just that it's like so that it flows better, sort of.
Right. No, I completely agree, especially if you're doing a spinoff, but you're continuing like one of your main stories. I think if you do a spinoff, but it's completely different characters in a different setting, then it would be kind of a different thing. But if you're taking, 2 or 3 characters from your main story arc, pushing them somewhere else, but they're still kind of contributing to the main thing, you kind of want that voice to read the same, so your readers aren't getting disjointed out of the books.
Right. And the other thing this was kind of a painful decision because I wasn't sure what to do. But I know a lot of co-authors that one of the authors writes almost the entire book. They both put their name on it. For me, for the Extinction Cycle spinoffs, I decided not to put my name on the actual book cover because I didn't write it. So my readers will be able to tell that I did not write that book. Not that the story is bad or anything like that. It's just I had decided that when I re-release some of these books, or when I do books in the future, I want to make sure that if my name's on it, that I'm going to have written a lot of it.
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for real.
Well, let's talk about. We're gonna get to the show. There's a lot of questions in the live chat tonight, and we're gonna get to all of them here in a second. I want to stop and talk about our show sponsor this week, which is writing military science fiction by Bill Frisbee, or William S. Frisbee Jr. The cool thing about this particular sponsorship is not only do I get to read the blurb and then pop the link into the live chat, but I get to hold a physical copy of it while I can't do overlays, but I can hold a physical copy in front of the camera and say, this is the book that's sponsoring the episode this week. And this is a really kick-ass book. If you write military science fiction, you absolutely need this book. Like for real, buy this book. I'm going to read the description and then put the link in the chat. A resource, a reference manual, a guidebook. This is actually coincidentally, this is the first nonfiction book that we've ever had as a show sponsor. So I'm going to read it dramatically like I would read a fiction book, but it's not. A crucial reference for writers of military science fiction, and a priceless resource for other writers. What goes on during a firefight? What does a staff sergeant do? Absolutely nothing. A corporal, a lieutenant, a captain. How big is a company? How far can troops march in a day? What are the mechanics of an orbital assault drop, and why aren't all soldiers equipped with machine guns? How many Marines are in a squad, and what are their jobs? What is the French Foreign Legion equivalent of a sergeant? What does adrenaline do to the human body? This book also covers things like types of armor, weapons, biotechnology, cybernetics, and psionics, and so much more. It's 250 pages of crucial knowledge and numerous links to more detailed information, with some information from millsci-fi.com. It contains a very significant amount of new information and updated sections that are linked to that website. Bill sent me a copy of the book, and it's a massive book. Like, it's not a regular size book, and it's got a lot of stuff in it. So, and I've been a fan of military sci-fi my whole life, and I thought I knew a lot. Even being in the military, I thought I knew a lot, but I'm looking at this going, God, I'm a dumb son of a bitch for not knowing some of the stuff that's in this book. So if you write mil sci-fi or you write anything close to mil sci-fi, you need to get this book, Writing Military Science Fiction, Infantry by William S. Frisbee Jr. Check it out. Pick it up. I'll put the link in the chat now while I'm talking about it. And while I'm doing that, if Scott or Chuck, if you guys want to hit the questions from the live chat.
Yeah, there was one in particular that I kind of caught my attention. Where was it? It was right here. Hold on. Here we go. Chris Porteau. Sorry if I messed that up. He wants to know if Nick can speak to the current market. Are readers becoming used to less quality? Does quality still matter? Does it matter more? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that, Nick?
So I think it depends. Well, it doesn't depend. I think quality is important in all formats. I think you're going to see, like, especially in audio, how important it is for a really solid narrator, for example. If we're talking about Kindle, I think there are anomalies where some books that aren't edited well, that don't have great covers, still sell well. But I think it's more important now than ever, if you want to have a book or a series do well over time, to have not only high quality editing and high quality storyline, but also cover and everything else you're doing to market it. Whether even in your blurbs on Amazon ads, it all has to be top notch to get to the top right now, because competition is so intense. So, and that's another thing when you're talking about, like, doing spinoffs. I am such an OCD type personality that I want to make everything perfect. So it was so much extra time trying to get, like, even the blurbs perfect for these books. But yeah, I absolutely think quality is important. I talked about this at 20 books to 50K in Vegas. You can have and perfect example of this is how I started my career. I did not understand the importance of high quality cover or editing or anything. I was doing this as a hobby. So I totally understand there's a lot of authors that are doing the same thing, but to reach that higher level, to have a top rated book, or to have reviews that are 4.5 or above, you really have to take the time to do that, to write a good solid story, market it properly, and to have all the tools that I just talked about. Now there are certain genres that I think you can get away with less, and I don't really want to single any out, so I won't. That's definitely but yeah, I think that
dinosaur romantic action erotica.
Yeah. Well, readers
Romance.
do have their own standards, and they have different expectations, I think, for different genres. So some of the genres that I write in, I can tell you, like, I'll tell you what's a high standard, and that's, science fiction, where if you're going to put your book in techno thrillers, or if you're going to put your book in hard science fiction, it damn better well be hard science fiction, and you're going to need to have some high quality science, or you're going to get, torn up in the reviews for that. So, and that's another kind of thing that I see a trend of right now. I spend probably an hour a day kind of skimming through Amazon just to see, like, what the trends are and stuff, because it helps me with my own books, but it also helps me with my clients. And I can tell you, one of the biggest trends right now is putting books in the wrong categories. And authors think that helps them. Maybe sometimes it does, but what it's doing is it's polluting your also bots, and it's also ensuring that you're not getting your book in the proper reader's hands. And that's going to cause problems with reviews, and it's going to cause problems with sales too. So there's a lot of obscure categories that are easier to rank in, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should put them in those. And, I use Kindle Rocket too. So I know I do try to find, like, those categories that are easier to rank in, but I really do try to make sure that my book fits in them too. So kind of went off there a little bit, off the whole quality question, but everything you do affects your sales. So quality can even boil down to those categories. Like, don't put your book in a category that it does not belong in, because that's going to hurt you just like a bad cover might, or a bad blurb, or comparing yourself to Stephen King, or making really like bold statements like that is not, it might get you some attention, but it's also going to get you negative attention as well.
This is the next Game of Thrones, and it's not at all.
Another one I see here, Lisa Yancey Olmstead. Nick, would you ever consider writing in a different genre than post-apocalyptic?
Consider doing like a crime type fiction novel.
Fun.
It's really hard to break into other genres, I think, and right now I'm kind of everything I've written is post-apocalyptic science fiction, pretty much, except for Trackers. And I think that's one reason Trackers didn't do as well as I'd hoped, because it didn't have the sci-fi elements that my other books have. So I would definitely consider doing that. But I think in that case, I would want to have a traditional publisher to kind of help get me into the bookstores if this is going to be a big release for me. But at this point, I write post-apocalyptic fiction because I absolutely love that genre. I always have, and it makes it easy because I love what I do. I love what I write.
Would you ever consider using a pen name for a different genre?
Not really. Well, I guess I haven't. I'm not saying that I never would. Like if I were ever to do romance or something, but I think that there'd have to be some major changes for me to do something like that. I mean,
well, I mean, you've kind of built up your brand around your name, so it'd be like starting from scratch again, really. I think with a pen name.
I think I tell clients a lot, because I have clients that have multiple pen names, and again, like, it's hard enough to build one brand. Why spread yourself thin and have multiple pen names if you're writing, unless your genres are so much different, or unless you have a reason, like you don't want your family to know or your work to know. Right. I get that.
Erotica and children's games or something. Probably
have a pen name. You're gonna want a pen name for that one.
Well, because we I thought we talked to somebody who they wrote young adult, but they also wrote some kind of active romance stuff, and those had different pen names.
But I have a few clients, or I've known some authors that are writing pen names and they're still in science fiction, and that, to me, I guess I have a hard time understanding why they would do that, because unless it's because of like a release schedule where they want to focus on one brand. But again, it's just so hard. It's so damn hard to build a brand right now, especially if you're a newer author. It's like you have to put so much into it, and having two just makes me feel overwhelmed just thinking about it.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the way I feel about it.
What are some of the good ways to build a brand? The brand building basics for some authors.
So I'm trying to think of like some basic stuff, but I really try to focus on the things that work. So when I'm teaching brand building, I focus mostly on the things that have worked for me. And so right now, and that changes from time to time, but like if I were to tell you right now, like what works for brand, I would say you need to focus on having a Facebook author page that you can run ads from. You would want to mostly use that page just for ads, but then build your readership in closed groups on Facebook. So like if you have a street team or a fan club or whatever, something like that, because it's easier to communicate with those readers. I think we all know that a newsletter is still a pretty effective way to get your new release info out, or to do discounts and to share your discounted books. Those are two of the things that I use the most when communicating with readers. And then obviously AMS ads are very important right now too. They far outweigh what Facebook is giving in terms of ROI. And it's also a quick, easy way to reach readers because they're already there. So like those are some marketing tools, but I try to focus all my time on the things that absolutely work for me. I've moved a little bit into Twitter and Instagram, but that's more of just like to communicate with people. It's not necessarily to promote my work. So I guess the short answer is to just figure out what works for you. So if your books sell on it, trying to think like if your books do really well when you're posting on Facebook, and that's where you see your biggest return, or in your newsletter, focus on those things. Don't try to stretch yourself out. And the other thing about it is, I think having a personality that people can connect with. I've tried to build like a very positive brand. I try not to get into controversial topics, especially online. And I try to be really good to my readers. I do a lot of giveaways. I do patches. I do bookmarks. I do all that stuff. That's a good way to build a brand too, because if you're good to your readers, usually your readers will be good to you as well. The other thing that's really important, I think, for brand building is, and you guys all do a phenomenal job with this stuff. This is more just for like the average, or not the average, but like, you know, someone that's maybe a debut author. But connecting with other authors is key, and doing that in a way where you're sharing and they're sharing back, like an egalitarian type thing. I know when I started, it's hard to build that sort of network when you don't have anything to return. So that's tough. But one thing I talk to a lot of my clients about that don't have, you know, any sort of newsletter or Facebook page or anything like that, like that's when you almost have to like put money up front and try to get in. Like Sci-Fi Bridge, for example, I know they accept a lot of new members, but there's some other groups that are exclusive. So it's tougher to build a brand in that term, but having author friends is key to success. I don't know if you guys can hear my dog growling, but it's
we find that random animal appearances boost our viewership quite a bit.
That is true.
I wanted to ask, I know that we have some other questions, but you had said closed Facebook group, and that intrigued me. So people that are starting a Facebook author group, closed versus public, or just some different variations?
So I have a public Facebook fan club, and then I have a closed like private reader group. That's just like my most that's like my street team basically. And the reason that I've had that closed is just because it's not like a secret, but I just don't want it public. I don't want people to see how many people are in it. And my fan club is really the bigger one, and that one is open to the public. But I do have questions like these. I want to make sure that readers that go into my fan club, for example, have actually read my books. And I've been really careful about that with my street team too. Like when you're building your brand and creating that reader base, you want to make sure that you're actually getting your readers in those groups. And that's something that I struggled with at the beginning. I had people in my groups that had never read my books, and I was thinking, if Facebook is showing people less and less, why should I have people in my groups that, I mean, I know that sounds kind of rude, but when Facebook is, especially my author page, when Facebook is charging me like literally thousands of dollars to show people my ads, or on my boosted posts rather, I want to make sure that those people are actual fans or readers or
actually interested in.
Well, it's kind of like your newsletter at that point, when you start to have to pay for a newsletter. If you've got 50,000 people on your newsletter, but only 10,000 people open, you have to pay for all those 50,000, whether they're opening or not. So you trim it down to having a 10,000 person newsletter where all of them open. You save money on the newsletter, and your ROI is more because you're having your open rates higher.
Yeah, so it's the same concept. So that's one thing. Like, I know there's a lot of courses on like reader magnets and how those work, and I understand the free model of where you're trying to attract reader, and I do some like the prolific giveaways. It's like one of those groups where you give a free book and then you get readers on your mailing list. So I have like a separate mailing list that's been that I've created just for that sort of thing, but I barely ever use it. And my main mailing list I've created by organic signups only. So either someone that signed up through my Facebook author page or that signed up through a link in my books. That's what my organic mailing list consists of. So that ROI, I'm sorry, not the ROI, but the click rate is way higher for that reason. And that's why I separated the two of them. And I know a lot of authors are doing that, but I'm pretty much getting totally away from the free model now, because it just doesn't seem to work. And I'm gonna let my dog in because this is annoying the hell out of me.
Keep a mic. Put a headset on that dog.
It's the Shih Tzu, not the pit bull. The pit bull's passed out.
Somebody else has a Shih Tzu.
What's
there was
that?
another question I wanted to, yeah, I've got a Shih Tzu too, but mine's neurotic. God, I've got like a whole page of notes. Let me look through the live chat here because we've got Kayleen Williams asked.
Sounds like that's like a process, but I don't know if that's
Yeah, we'll talk about that here in a second. But Kayleen Williams asks, "What is your sweet spot for series length, or does that depend on the story?" And you mentioned that earlier when talking about like Michael Anderle and his series, and some other authors that are out there that get. David Weber, for instance, has like 17 books in his series, even though it's been going on for 20 or 25 years or whatever. But you look at a series, and as a reader, you come into a 20 book series and you're like, nope, because I can't do that. But if you come into a 3 or 4 book series, I can do that. So in your experience, what do you think is the ideal length they're going to produce a series?
There's two elements to that. One is the story. Am I still enjoying writing the story, or does it feel like work? If it feels like work, then I take a break from it and decide if I want to come back later. And the other thing is sales. Now, sales is kind of going to depend on the individual author. So like what I think financially is worth it might not be the same as someone else. So for me, like I'm looking at my shelf right now, like trackers, I ended at 4. I was going to end it at 3, but book 3 just ended up being so big, I split it up into 4. But the reason that I haven't gone back to that world is just because of sales mostly, and because I ended it in the way that I was happy with that. Extinction Cycle, initially I was ending it at 3, then 5, then 7, and now I'm doing a spinoff that takes place 10 years in the future because I missed that series so much. I don't know if financially that's going to be the right move for me, but that's also why I pulled in a co-author while Tony's helping me with those, because it does take some of the gamble out of that. It's not, a full book commitment. It's half of a book commitment for me.
Right.
So I think it really does depend on the individual author and a lot of different factors, but those would be the two things that I would point out. There's some other series though. Like I see every once in a while you get on Amazon or elsewhere and you see these 1-stars like, oh, I hate series. But the truth of the matter is most readers love series, and that's why it's so popular. So I think like as long as your books are selling and as long as you're enjoying writing the series, keep going. But don't be afraid to try other things too. I see a lot of authors that will stick with one series and not go into new stuff. And that was a scary thing for me, but I was forced into writing the Extinction Cycle because I knew that I was not going to be able to make a living or to have to go back to my job if I kept going with orbs. So that's why I did the Extinction Cycle. And then I decided I wanted to try something different with Helldivers and then also trackers because I wanted to do an EMP book. So for me, it's inspiration as well, like on what I want to write.
So kind of staying on the same vein of length of series, you mentioned earlier when we were talking about release schedules that you were releasing books every 6 months. And we've heard a lot from guests that we've had on the show and even from some of our close writer friends where they're talking about the 30, 60, 90-day cliff on Amazon. And there's even people that are beating an 18-day or a 2-week cliff. And I'm kind of of the opinion that these cliffs are kind of man-made in a sense that they're setting up expectations for readers, and then kind of destroying this, because you talked about traditional publishing earlier, and that they're kind of on an extended cycle of once a year or once every 18 months or whatever. But are you still on kind of that 6-month schedule where you're releasing books, or the indie side, the indie side of things, have you sped that up a little bit? What's your thoughts on that as a series?
Yeah, That's a good question. And actually with the extinction cycle, I was doing 3 to 4 months release. That was kind of my sweet spot. But it also gave me a chance to get the audio out, and it gave me a chance to, do my marketing, same marketing plan I used for everything, and to focus on that. But to me, and they're also 400-page novels, 350, 400-page novels. I think some might have been around 300 too. But that that model to me is still what works best and what I think works best. Like when I see like novels that are coming out that are 200 pages long, that's great, but you're not getting as many page reads either. So
Right.
for me, it almost makes more sense to do a novel length book instead of doing like a novella or a short novel, because you're missing out on the key thing here that I think a lot of readers haven't tapped into, and that's audio. And
Yes.
audio, if you release your ebook the same time as audio, and that's why I was adamant about these extinction cycle spinoffs all have audio coming out the same day, because that's what I do for my books now, and I think that's what's giving me an advantage when readers can buy both at the same time, or to do the whisper sync type situation. I have seen some authors that have had some 6-figure books. The audio has not done well, and part of that is because of the release schedule. I guarantee it. So that's one thing that I kind of recommend is, and that's one thing that audio publishers want too. There's a reason when they say, like when they talk to you, like, hey, when are you going to release your ebook? Like, are you going to release it within a couple of weeks of the audiobook, or is it going to the audiobook? Are you going to just do it before us? Because in almost all cases, you're going to have to wait for the audio. So, well, I think also a lot of authors don't understand how much money is on the table with audio and how much they're leaving on the table by not focusing on that. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, so I see a lot of that. Like I see these like serial short stories coming out, and that's fine. Like if that's your model and that works for you, that's great. And you put it in a box set eventually, like that's cool, but you're missing out on one, paperbacks, which is not that huge of a market, but it still helps. And then the huge market, which is audio. And the other thing is audiobook narrators aren't going to want to work with people that are doing those short type stories and pumping them out, and especially if you're doing the royalty share on ACX. That's my opinion. I'm not sure if that's necessarily totally correct, but that's why I have the release schedule I do. I'd be willing to sit on an ebook a lot longer, or in this case, I'm sitting on a book for almost a year in order to get an amazing narrator and to have a marketing plan behind it. That's a traditionally published book, but even for my self-published books, I wait for the audio to come out. And I'm making more in audio now than I am in ebook. So that's...
I love audio. Like that's how I do most of my listening. One of the questions that Lauren brought up, and I'm kind of interested in as well, is she's asking, why does it work that way? Specifically, why releasing them together works better than a non-simultaneous release. For instance, there are some authors that will release their ebook as soon as it is done, because when you talk about simultaneous releases, it could be 5, 6, 7 months down the road when that narrator that you want becomes available. Or if you go through Podium or Audible Studios, they will give you options for narrators typically, but then you have to pick, and then you still have to fit into their schedule. And so there are some authors that will release the ebook and then release the audiobook after. So what are the advantages of the simultaneous release that you see going forward through a series, instead of just doing it on 2 separate release days?
I'll put the question back on, just maybe make it open-ended, but give me one example of a book, an ebook that is selling super well after 6 or 7 months. There might be a few, but think about it this way. If the ebook comes out and does really well, that's amazing exposure that you're getting. And a lot of readers are just listeners right now. So they go up and down the charts trying to figure out, well, what's hot right now, maybe in Kindle that I can pick up in audio. So that's like exposure that you're getting right away. And if you wait 6 months after your ebook comes out, you've lost, like, if you want to talk about the cliff that maybe is man-made or maybe not, I can tell you there is definitely a cliff after a couple months. And
Right.
I've seen this trend where 5 years ago, my books were selling like crazy they could sell for 6 months, like super crazy. Now my books might not sell super crazy at all, or they might sell for like a month or two like that. So that's why I use that period to kind of market everything together. And I can tell you so many of those audio listeners that I've kind of formed a relationship will tell you that they buy ebook and audio together at the same time. So that's why I think it's really important. I'm not saying you have to release the same day. I'm able to do that with my spinoffs because those stories were already written and I had this planned for months in advance. And I have sat on my manuscripts for a little while to make that available to readers. But I do think at least having them come out within that period of time where your ebook's selling well, that's the window you want to have your audiobook out in. And it's just, the other thing is if you're writing a series and you're putting out a book every month or 2 months, or even every 18 days, you said, there's no way in hell an audiobook publisher is going to be able to keep up with that. So even if you have one, it's just insane. Like that schedule, what's happening right now is authors are working like, I'm going bald, right? But I imagine a lot of authors are going bald too because they're working their asses off to try to hit that schedule when really you don't need to put books out that fast. And there's no way you can have a story out, like a 300, 400 page book out in 18 days or a month without having problems. I'm sorry, you can be the best writer in the world. But that and missing out on audio is one reason that I would recommend to try to have a little bit of a less aggressive publishing schedule. I know everyone wants to get everything out when it's hot, but you're missing out on a couple of different venues like audio.
I completely agree. And I can say from personal experience, I can look at, I've got my, all my sales broken down on a spreadsheet for 2017. And as I'm looking at them, and this is just for my Terra Nova series with Richard. But I look at the two ebooks that we have out in 2017, and then the audiobook that is a publisher's pack through Podium. I have made half of the income. Well, let's just say, so I don't even know how to quantify that. So I made a total number of half of the income that I've made all year, I made in 1 quarter on an audiobook. How do I break that down into numbers? So if I made $10,000 all year through the audiobook and the ebook, 5,000 of that I made through the in 1 quarter in an audiobook.
Right. So the question is, how much more would you have made if it would have come out
simultaneously?
Yeah. And I don't know if it's going to be the same every time, but like I released the Trackers box set, and the Trackers box set for whatever reason took off on Audible, and it's been, I don't even know. I know that it sold 7,000 copies within the first couple of weeks. That's the only number that I've been given by the publisher. It's been out a couple months now, and it's been consistently in the top like 25, 50 on Audible. And it came out the same time as the Trackers box set in Kindle. And I know that's part of the reason why, because I do have that spillover. And there's algorithms on Audible too. And they're not the same as on Amazon. Basically, the way that I see Audible working is the way Amazon worked 4 years ago. So
yes, yeah,
there's some of that like organic momentum you get on Audible that you don't get on Amazon anymore. And that's probably going to change as the market gets saturated like it has in Kindle. But I basically have tried to do anything I can to give myself an advantage in audio right now, because it's not untapped, but it's still, I would say it's more of a gold mine right now than Kindle is. And I'm trying to think of like how to explain this, but I don't want to like offend any authors that have that sort of like Hugh Howey type wool serial type publishing, because I think that, what's up, Steve?
Oh my god.
Ridiculous. What's up, Steve?
Wow. like
Anyway.
sliding under the wire.
Yeah, I don't want to like say that one publishing style is not better than another. I'm just giving my experience on what I think works for me to share that with others, because it could work for them or it could not. Say that chances are, if you release your audio close to your ebook and your ebook's selling well, that will give you an edge and you will have spillover, and that will help with algorithms, and that's the end of the story. I won't say another word about it.
No, so that's it. That's a really good point. J.R. Hanley asks, because I believe that the audio market is an under-tapped market for most authors.
Get in on the ground floor, get in while it's still new, and you get at the front end, you're gonna do better than
Right. But the problem with the audiobook market is that it's not as easy to get into as the ebook market, right? Because the ebook market, all you have to do is write a book and put it on Amazon and you'll sell. In the ebook market, the audiobook market, you have to work with narrators. You've got to work with actually either ACX or paying them up front. J.R. Hanley asks, what advice would you give to people not in your position for audio? For instance, having either an audiobook publisher like Blackstone, or being able to afford out of pocket a narrator when they're talking about trying to get the best talent for their book. Do you have any suggestions or advice on that front?
If I could go back and do it over again, and if I'm thinking in those terms, I would almost advise, like, is the question saying that they have the money to buy talent out of pocket? Is that
no? It's saying they don't have.
I think it's
they,
saying, what do you do if you don't have the success yet, and you're trying to work on a bootstrap?
Right. Yeah, and I'm sorry if that came off as like a little cocky, because I was in that situation myself. I mean, I'm in a different situation now where I can wait to get the audio out, and I do have access to high quality narrators and publishers. But if you don't, like when I was, my first audio deal was after my ebook did really well. And that was Orbs. And the Orbs series did not really do well at all in audio. It's for part of the same reasons I'm talking about right now. They came out way after the fact. I didn't have any way to market them. So if you don't have the money to pay out of pocket for a narrator through ACX, then really I would not try to hire just anyone that maybe has never narrated. I would try to focus your energy and your budget, whatever that is, solely on launching your ebook and making it a bestseller, because then you'll have audiobook publishers coming to you that will be able to pay for the narration and pay for all that stuff. You might not have as best a shot of getting a best-selling audiobook when it does come out as you would have if you hired a narrator, that has name recognition,
right,
to launch with your ebook. But that's really your only option, and that was my only option. I mean, I didn't even think about audio 5 years ago. It wasn't even on my radar. When I first had an offer from an audio publisher, I was like, this is extra money. I'm not going to ever earn out. I'm not going to make money doing this. But then the audio market has exploded since then. So,
yep.
I've been kind of talking about what to do if you're at a certain level, but I was ignoring the kind of the authors that don't have that sort of access. So in that case, I would focus primarily on your ebook series and making that and having as many sales as possible, because that's really going to be your door opener into audio publishing, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I completely agree, and I think that making your ebook as successful as possible will bring you into the audiobook market, especially like when you look at like Podium. You can't go to Podium and pitch your book to Podium because they are a company that goes and searches you out.
Right.
And I don't know how Blackstone does it. Steve will have some insight on how Audible Studios do their work, but it really is a market that to do it correctly will make you a lot of money. But if you're not, if you're not an audiobook listener and you don't understand what audiobook can do for your product, you need to be, if you really want to make your audiobook successful, because you can't just say, I'm going to make an audiobook because audiobooks are big. You want to make an audiobook, but then you have to look at, what am I making here? Like, for instance, I'm doing a military sci-fi audiobook. Who do I want to read my audiobook? I don't want Joe Blow from somewhere to read it. I want Bob Bray to read it, or I want Luke Daniels to read it, or I want Mark Boyette to read it, or something. You have to look at those things when you look at that stuff, because when you go into the audiobook market, not only is it your name that's selling it, or your title or your cover, but it's the narrator that sells it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there are people that listen to narrators, and only that narrator. There are people that go to books because Luke Daniels reads them. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's the thing is a lot of people I saw at the conference and stuff would talk about, everybody's excited about audiobook, but doing a half-ass audiobook is not going to make your non-selling ebook sell.
Right.
If you work on your ebook first, if that's what you got the research.
And honestly, I think in a lot of ways in the audio market, the ebook is really just like pre-marketing for the audiobook, because so much of this business is about getting eyes and attention on what you've created, that if you can't get the eyes and attention to the story that you've written in ebook form, it's just going to be all the harder to convince anybody to pay attention to the audio version.
Right.
Like when I'm speaking mostly like the narrators aren't going to look at an audiobook, at an ebook, no matter how well it's written, that no one's paying attention to, and say, hey, I want to do that. You know what I'm saying?
I care 100% more about my audiobooks than I do my ebooks. But the reality is, if I didn't put time and effort into the ebooks, the audiobooks, there wouldn't be anything there unless you're getting an Audible original deal, which is like, it's not very easy to do. And so the market, Josh has said it a million times, the market's different, but the market can be the same. And I think that's what I came in on Nick saying. By the way, I love you, Nick, man. I miss you. I'm only here because I rushed home so that I could just, haven't seen you in a while.
Wow, you're swooning. I mean,
Listen,
you're like legit swooning.
Nick is my rock gnome. He's just everything to me.
Did you get your rock gnome?
I what?
Did you get your rock gnome tattoo?
Oh, I can't wait. Next time we're together, we're gonna get rock gnome tattoos together.
Right. In Vegas with Rhett?
Absolutely, man. Anyway, the point that I was making was that something good. Just make believe I said something good. I got distracted by Nick's amazing eyes.
It happens. It happens. It really does.
What color are my eyes?
Doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter.
You don't even know.
Brown. They're
He just wants you for your body.
Let's get back to audiobooks.
J.R. Hanley wants to know,
listen,
is that why Amazon's trying to start an audio narrator school? J.R. Hanley asks, is it? Oh no, it's not a question. I guess it is why Amazon is trying to start an audio narrator school. I've heard that a couple different times. That trying to develop some new talent in the field of narrators.
Maybe I should sign up for that.
And it's one of the things too when you look at like when you're talking about audiobook narrators and publishing, and JR has a good point. You talk about narrators that will sell your book, like Ray Porter or Mark Boyette or Bob Bray or Luke Daniels, whoever reads your book. It's a very small pool, and so it's very hard to get those people to read your books, which means there's got to be more people to read your books. There's got to be more readers. So if there's other readers that are out there, other narrators that are out there that are just as good as these people, they just aren't getting the attention. And getting the attention of the listeners is the big thing. But I think that the material right off the bat, like you said earlier, Nick, is the quality of the material makes the narrator, which also brings everything full circle to, I like this combination of what's going on.
A question from J.R. Hanley. about, hold on a second. What are your thoughts on new talent who have good voices? I think that everyone started off somewhere. So if you find a narrator that you really like their voice and they're within your budget, go for it. What I was trying to explain earlier is that I see a lot of authors that are in the position where they can definitely afford good narrators, and they might have a traditional deal where they're not waiting to release their audio and it might be coming out way after the fact. That's not my model. That's fine if that's what they're doing. But what I'm trying to explain is what I think at this level, what the best strategy is. For someone new, I think I kind of already explained what to do if with selling the ebook and focusing on that if you're not able to tap into the audio market the way that I am or that others in this group are. But if you do find someone on ACX that you love their voice and that fits your budget, I think that's great and to go for it because everyone was discovered like that. You know, they all started somewhere, unless it's a celebrity voice, but their prices would be super high anyways, regardless if they've never narrated an audiobook.
Right.
So it's not going to be available. So
Sorry.
Go ahead. That was just kind of, I wanted to answer that real quick.
Well, I was just going to chime in because that's what I do. JR, if it's an ACX narrator or if it's a name that's not necessarily popular, I think Nick would agree with me on this. You have to have a market plan. You have to. Because the big names, a lot of us rely on the big names to help sell. Now, the only one that's like doing it buco without the authors doing anything is R.C. Bray. You know, and I don't mean they do nothing, but like there's not a lot of narrators out there that just sell books. But if you're getting an ACX narrator, I had one for one of my books that I thought was fantastic, and he did a great job. The book didn't do anything because I didn't have a marketing strategy at all. The books won't just sell themselves because like there's so many really good books on Audible with really talented and also well-known narrators that without either a well-known narrator or a great marketing strategy, and hopefully both, it's going to be very, very difficult. Would you agree with that, Nick?
Oh, absolutely. The one thing though that I don't know if it's hard to know what type of marketing strategy is going to work because so much of it is still based off Audible promoting you.
Right.
I mean, because there's not like Audible picks what titles they discount, and they discount very few titles. Like whenever you get one of those email blasts, like, hey, here's the same 50 audio titles, and not the same ones, but you see a lot of the same ones being discounted and stuff.
Or the same authors.
Yeah, right. And that's why like some authors are huge in audio and not in other. I give you a bunch of examples, but I don't want to name names. It's not a bad thing. It's just that's just the way it is. And Audible promotes those titles because they know it's going to make them money. It makes total sense. But what I'm saying is, for the average audio author, even me, I don't really have an ability to market books to market my audiobooks other than just my newsletter, and that's not really enough to tap into to the market. So like if you're a new author in audio and you have a big following in ebook, there aren't resources available to you to market your audiobook like there are for ebooks. It's almost all based on Audible system, what titles they pick to discount, because you can't discount your books through ACX from what I understand. Like you can't,
That's right.
You cannot.
you can't run sales.
Yeah.
So
There's something to remember. You still can do Facebook marketing, Instagram marketing. You can still do ads for your Audible books.
Right, and that's effective on box sets, but it's almost not worth doing for Facebook ads if it's just for one book. I mean, unless it's part of a wider span. But what I'm saying is there just aren't as many options available to market, and there weren't. But even when I first started, I was thinking about this morning. I was like, how the hell did I get to where I am with my marketing? Because I was doing all these different strategies for Chris and for my my spinoff stories. And I was thinking back to the beginning, 5 years ago, there was barely anything available to market ebooks. And that's even when Facebook ads were small. And there was definitely no Amazon ads, and BookBub was still like, it was there, but it wasn't what it is now. So Now you have tons of different ways to market your ebooks, but that's still not the case for audio. Like, it's growing, but it's so dependent on the gatekeepers, which is how it was for ebooks too. And I don't mean to discourage anyone, but that's just the truth. So that's why it's like, if you're going to tap into the audio market and you're a new author, you really have to, I think, have a budget and save up to do that and hire a narrator, because that is one way. Like Bob Bray, he brings his own readers with his name. That's one way to tap into the market, is to have a narrator that's going to bring you readers.
If you could wait for 2 years.
What's that?
If you could wait for 2 years for his schedule to open up.
Yeah, well, not necessarily Bob Bray, but I think there's some other big names that you can get if you pay. I think some of these narrators are also starting to understand, like, hey, if they do a royalty share, they're going to work with you and make their schedule available. Whereas if, like, the audio publishers are paying them by the hour, they're not making what they're making if they have a royalty share. So I think there's still an advantage to doing ACX and spending the extra money and doing a royalty split with the narrator.
Hey, I love you guys. I got to go.
Later, dude.
Bye.
Later, man.
See you, Steve. Wow, he's just bailed.
Yeah. He's in and out. That's what he does. He comes in, he wrecks the party, and then he leaves. No, so it's very interesting, and we've been talking about audiobooks for a while. And audiobooks are definitely a specific market that I think, whether you're indie or traditional or a hybrid, you definitely need to be into as a separate market, and you need to look at your books like that. For you, I think that and I think a lot of authors don't take this into account when they write, but I don't know if you've done it naturally or if you've done this as a result of the audio market, but there are some people that write their books specifically for audio or write their books with audio in mind.
I saw that today, actually. Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah. And so when you listen to your book on audio, you have a lot of, when you listen to, let's just say, for instance, this is a ridiculous example, War and Peace. Listen to War and Peace on audio and you're going to fall asleep.
Mm-hmm.
But if you listen to like for instance, Helldivers, or one of Jeff Chaney's books that is written specifically with audio in mind, that book is keeping the listener engaged rather on the material because of how it's written. So is that kind of focused on, has that changed how you write your books because of the way that the audio market has changed things, or?
Had this question before, and I didn't even actually consider that. And I saw an author today post that they wrote their book with a certain narrator's voice in mind, and they wrote their book kind of based off that. But for me, I just can't really, I could never get into that mindset. I think it would throw off my pacing and stuff. I'm always in the back of my mind thinking, like, okay, what is the narrator going to do with this? I've never done that. I can see why others might, but no, my success in audio really hasn't affected the way I write at all. My focus on my books is to have kick-ass pacing and to focus on characters and just writing the best story I can. And I'm lucky because I write action books that those do kind of blend well with audio. So maybe if you're writing in a genre that isn't as fast paced, you might have to think about things like that. But I think it's just natural for our genre to have, I'm not saying it's easy to write for audio, but if your pacing's on for your science fiction or your thriller, then that's going to make a pretty damn engaging audiobook if you have a narrator that understands the beats of the story.
Yeah.
Right. That actually came up in a project that Scott's working on and that we're doing as a company, where you have a narrator that is narrating the story, but the way that he is narrating the story does not feed to how you read it in print or an ebook. And specifically, so the story that I'm talking about is Shorty, and when you read Scott Moon's story Shorty, it is a very fast clipped, like very snarky type character. And the first draft of audio that we got from the narrator was not snarky and it was not fast. And so when you read it as an ebook and then you listen to it as an audiobook, you're like, this is two separate things, two completely different things. And so you really want to make sure that when you look at the production of the audiobook, that it mirrors or closely mirrors what you're doing with your actual book. Because if it doesn't, then you're going to have a disconnect from people that read the ebook and maybe they want to listen to the audiobook, and they listen to the audiobook and they're like, well, that's not at all what the character is, so I'm not even going to listen to it. Or that they listen to the audiobook and maybe the ebook isn't out yet, so now they want to, or the follow-on audiobooks aren't out yet, so they want to go read the ebook, but then the ebook is not like the audio. And so you want to make sure that you have those lined up, structurally speaking.
Yeah, because like when I read a print or ebook version of like Richard Fox or Jeff's books, or like when I'm writing in the Ember War and the Emberverse, when I write something that has to do with, say, Valdar, I hear Luke Daniels in my head. And so when I write all those characters, I do write for audiobook because I've heard so many of the audiobooks, like 15 of them or something.
Right.
Where I can write that way. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Fun. Makes it
Yeah.
easier sometimes.
Yeah. And I actually don't get involved with the production at all, since that's handled by Blackstone. I don't even get like advanced copies to listen to. So I normally don't even get my audio until it comes out, which I kind of regret with one of my series, being super disappointed in some of the voices used for trackers. So I think that that's one thing that, going back to like using ACX and stuff, you're forced to listen to the audiobook and to make sure you're part of that process. And that's one thing that, I think I'm so involved with when I do my Kindle books, working with a team of editors, that I've missed out on an audio that I think that I could have helped a little bit with. And going back to what Josh said, like, it's really important that your narrator's voices sound like they should sound like from the ebook. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So I don't know if I'm explaining this properly, but like, I have one character in my tracker series that is not realistic at all, and there's been so much negative feedback on it, and I actually had to agree with the feedback. Like, it sucks, but it's so that there's situations like that where I think the author has to play a role too.
Right. Absolutely.
In that process.
Yeah.
No, yeah, no, I was just going to say that Steve and Rhett actually had some problems with that, and not problems, but issues where in their first Web of Eyes book, where Luke Daniels was reading a character that was
character.
Yes. That was their only negative feedback in that book, was that Luke was so off this side of it, that people didn't like the way that he read that character. And so Steve and Rhett were like, hey, can we re-record this? And Audible did to say, yeah, let's re-record that. And Luke agreed. And so they're going to go back and fix that. But that's something that, unfortunately, like, I guess through Blackstone, but like with Podium sent us all the files to listen before they released it. And so we could listen to all the files and go, oh, that all sounds good. Yeah, we're okay to release. But you'll get the same thing through ACX because you've got to proof all the copies.
Right.
But I mean, this has been a great discussion. We could probably talk for hours about publishing and audio and all that stuff. Some of my favorite conversations are about how these things happen. But I do want to just kind of bring it full circle and say, like, right at the beginning, you had a whole bunch of series going on, and you said in 2 weeks you're releasing this, and another couple of weeks you're releasing this. So what do we have here going forward with Nick Sansbury Smith going forward through 2019? what are you doing here in the short term that we can expect to see?
Extinction Cycle spinoffs from other authors will be coming out over the next couple of months. There's 3 series, 2 of them are trilogies, and then one is a just 2-book series. And then I'll do another anthology of the short stories from the Extinction Cycle Kindle Worlds. So that's kind of then on May 7th, Helldivers 5 Captives comes out. So that's my big release for the year so far. Still trying to work out whether or not Helldivers, there's going to be Helldivers 6, whether that will come out in November, which has kind of been the release schedule in the past. And then my big project that I've been working on for a couple of years, I have two of the 3 books done. That will come out sometime in early 2020. And that's cool. my next series. That is post-apocalyptic. It's like crime fiction. I think it's kind of relevant to some of the things happening in government today. There's a mafia element to it too, which has always been a fascination of mine. And then there will be a Helldivers 7 as well at some point. So that's really what I have on my plate, aside from the Extinction Cycle spinoff, which is right now just a trilogy. That's the one I'm writing with Tony Melchiori, and that will be out later this year. And Bob Ray is going to do that one. So yeah, that covers it. I'm working on some other stuff too, but I have no idea when it's going to be out. And at this point, I'm just trying to like make sure that my release dates, I have the ability to put all my marketing behind each book and not neglect anything. The series next year, the publisher wants like a huge window to market that, and I'm cool with that too. Even though literally the book's done and it might be over a year before it comes out. So that's a little crazy for me, but
it would cause me to die a little bit every day.
I've had some experience in that kind of, yeah. So I completely understand how you feel for that.
Patience.
Yeah, it's tough though, man. Especially after you've self-published or you've hybrid published, and you can like, that's done and it's out, and it's done and it's out, and then you're like, and it's done, and like 5 years later, you don't even remember what you've written, and then it came out, and everybody's like, oh my god, this was the best thing. You're like, I don't remember what I wrote.
I don't even remember some of the characters in some of my old stories.
I'll read it.
Yeah. Well, Nick, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. And I always love hanging out and talking with you. Are you going to Vegas this year for 2019?
I think so. Yes, I'm 99% positive. I might actually do a little reader meetup as well beforehand, and then come hang out with you after that.
That'd be cool.
So,
excellent.
I love Vegas. I'll be at the poker table too.
Yeah, Scott brought that up earlier. He was like, "Is he a big poker player? Or we should talk about that."
Yeah, last year I think I went out there and played 4 times because I used to play all the time online. That's how I spent a lot of my college and paid for some of it too. And then they called it, I think, Black Thursday, where the government shut down all the websites, froze all the money and assets, and I stopped playing like cold turkey. So I really have missed the adrenaline rush I get from poker, and the only way to really play it is to go out there. So
did you guys see the Bitcoin thing that happened, or the cryptocurrency that some owner died, like the CEO of this company died, and there's $190 million just locked in this cryptocurrency thing right now?
He's 30 and he died of like Crohn's complications in India. And yeah, the 190 million is what is in the accounts that he has the passwords for, apparently.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Bitcoin is like humongous in the gambling community. Like all the broker pros that I play with out there, I try to talk to them about like investing in stocks. They don't invest in stocks; they're all in Bitcoin. Like one dude was telling me he's lost 300 grand in Bitcoin.
Yeah,
because they would just it was huge. It took that out all just like the crypto has crashed like to a fraction of what it was at. So
oops.
Right.
Oops. Well, my bad. See you later. Yeah.
Well, everybody that hung out within the live chat today, thank you guys for so much for coming and hanging out with us and providing some great questions. And this is probably our second longest episode we've done, so that's cool, and I'm okay with it. I am going to do another morning haze on Wednesday, and on Wednesday I'm going to be talking about diversifying author income. Because that's what one of my major focuses for this year. And if you don't know, the Morning Haze is a show I'm going to be doing on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
How do you spell
Because it's Scott, you're a funny guy. It's
Are you
H-A.
drinking on those shows? Like you
No, I'm
do
gonna be
this?
drinking coffee. I've got some whiskey in me today, so if I'm slurring my words, I apologize. But it's the Morning Haze, Hayes. I tried to go the other way, and some people had issue with that. So Hayes, the Morning Haze. It's going to be at 9 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'm basically documenting my transition to being a full-time author. I am retiring from the police department. And actually I have 1 week left. So this next the 12th is my final day on the Wichita Police Department, and then I will be a full-time author. And so I wanted to document that and start a blog around that. So that is what's happening with me. We have, let's see, what's coming up on the writer's journey on Thursday. I've got my big ass calendar over
I think
here.
somebody saved the day. I think they called Rhett the show saver or something.
I think Rhett is saving the day. Let's see. How do I set up a newsletter with Rhett C. Bruno is going to be on the writer's journey on Thursday. We're going to have a round table next week. And then on the 14th, Brian Meeks is going to be talking about Amazon ads. So you do not want to miss that.
That'll be a good one because those have changed a lot in the last few months.
Absolutely. But everybody that's coming to hang out with us live or listening to the audio feed, thank you guys so much for your support and coming and hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. Nick, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight and bearing with us on our questions. Absolutely. It's always a blast. We will be back next week. We'll be back on Monday for live on Keystroke Media. We're going to talk about some writing. We're going to talk about some reading and, of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Media. Peace.
Peace.